My wife texted, working late again, but I saw her car at the Hilton with her boss Brandon. Then I overheard her tell him he's so desperate to keep this marriage together, he'd never leave me. I smiled and booked my flight to Seattle. I'm Alex Carter, 41 years old, senior finance manager at Midwest Capital, with an MBA from Northwestern and 18 years of marriage that had become a masterclass in taking someone for granted. The text had arrived at while I was reviewing quarterly reports that would determine whether 3 companies got acquired or liquidated. Working late again, don't wait up. M. But Pete Sullivan, my neighbor and Chicago PD detective, had already texted me a photo of Marta's blue Honda parked at the downtown Hilton next to a silver Porsche that belonged to Brandon Fisk, her boss at that mid-tier advertising agency. Brandon was the kind of guy who wore $300 cologne, had artificially whitened teeth, and called other men sport while discussing his CrossFit achievements. What Marta didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything for months. Every late night, every suspicious text, every lie about client dinners. My finance background had taught me that data tells stories, and the story here was crystal clear. She'd been having an affair with Brandon for at least 4 months, using our joint credit card for hotel rooms and expensive dinners that she claimed were business expenses. The real kicker came the next morning when I followed them to Francesca's, that upscale Italian place downtown, where half our neighborhood could see them holding hands over tiramisu. I sat 3 tables away, recording everything on my phone while Brandon fed her dessert and she giggled like a teenager. That's when I heard the conversation that changed everything. "What if Alex finds out?" Marta asked, twirling her wedding ring nervously. Brandon laughed, the kind of arrogant chuckle that comes from men who've never faced real consequences. "What's he going to do? File for divorce? He's so desperate to keep this marriage together, he'd never leave you. Besides, even if he did, you'd get half of everything. The house, his retirement accounts, probably alimony too." "You really think so?" "Trust me, sweetheart. Guys like Alex don't have the backbone for messy divorces. He'll keep pretending everything's fine because he's too scared of being alone. Meanwhile, we can keep doing this until I'm ready to leave my wife, officially." I smiled as I processed what I'd just heard. Brandon thought I was some passive suburban husband who would quietly accept whatever humiliation they decided to dish out. He was about to learn how wrong he was. See, what neither of them knew was that I'd been in contact with headhunters for months about a position in Seattle. Pacific Northwest Holdings had been courting me aggressively for their regional finance director role, offering a $40,000 salary increase plus executive benefits. The base salary alone would be $165,000, nearly double what Brandon probably made running his struggling agency. I'd also been quietly consulting with Margaret Hoffman, one of Chicago's most ruthless divorce attorneys, who'd already reviewed our financial situation. Since I could prove adultery with the evidence I'd gathered, Illinois law would be very favorable to me in divorce proceedings. Marta would get far less than the 50% she was expecting, and given her unemployed status after the affair became public, alimony was highly unlikely. But the real advantage I had was my professional network. 18 years in corporate finance had connected me with executives at dozens of Chicago companies, including 3 of Brandon's biggest clients. A few strategic conversations about professional ethics and client fund misuse could destroy his agency overnight. That afternoon, I called David Harrison at Pinnacle Manufacturing, Brandon's largest client. David and I had worked together on a merger 2 years ago, and he trusted my judgment implicitly. "Alex, good to hear from you. What's on your mind?" "David, I need to share something with you about your advertising agency. Are you sitting down?" I explained the situation professionally, focusing on the misuse of client entertainment funds for personal hotel rooms and the ethical concerns around workplace relationships affecting professional judgment. I sent him copies of credit card statements showing charges to the Hilton on dates when Brandon claimed to be entertaining David's team, but the hotel receipts showed only 2 people in the room. "Jesus Christ, Alex, are you telling me this guy's been billing us for his affair?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. I've got documentation going back 4 months. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, even weekend getaways charged to what he calls client development." David's voice turned ice cold. "Send me everything you have. We'll be terminating our contract immediately and demanding a full audit of our account." I made similar calls to Brandon's other major clients, always keeping the conversation professional and focused on business ethics rather than personal drama. Within 48 hours, 3 companies representing 70% of his agency's revenue had terminated their contracts and were demanding financial audits. Meanwhile, I accepted the Seattle position and began planning my strategic exit from Chicago. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I wasn't destroying Brandon's life. I was just making sure his clients knew how their money was being spent. What they did with that information was their choice. The consequences came faster than I'd expected. Brandon's agency laid off 6 employees by Friday, including Marta, who suddenly found herself unemployed in an industry where gossip travels at light speed. Word had already spread through Chicago's advertising community about the affair and the client losses, making her essentially unemployable at any reputable agency. My phone buzzed constantly with increasingly desperate texts from Marta. "We need to talk. This is about Brandon, isn't it? You can't just destroy people's lives because you're hurt." But I was already in Seattle, standing in my new corner office on the 32nd floor with a view of Elliott Bay that made Chicago's skyline look like a postcard. My assistant, Jennifer Blake, had done additional research on Brandon's financial situation that painted an even bleaker picture. "He's leveraged to the hilt," she reported, sliding a tablet across my desk. "The Porsche is leased, the downtown condo has a 90% mortgage, and he owes his ex-wives $12,000 in back alimony. Without those client contracts, he'll be bankrupt within 60 days. What about his personal relationship with my wife?" Jennifer's expression was sympathetic but professional. "My contact at the Hilton says he checked out of his regular room Tuesday and hasn't been back. Apparently, he called your wife Wednesday night and told her they needed to take a break until things cooled down. She didn't take it well." Perfect. Brandon was exactly the kind of man who abandoned ship the moment things got difficult, leaving Marta to face the consequences alone. She'd gambled our 18-year marriage on a guy who wouldn't even stand by her when his business collapsed. When I returned to Chicago 3 weeks later for the divorce proceedings, the transformation was complete. Brandon had fled to Phoenix to live with his brother after his Porsche got repossessed and eviction notices appeared on his condo door. Marta was staying at her mother's house, unemployed and unemployable, trying to figure out how her fairy tale affair had turned into a nightmare. The divorce attorney meeting was exactly what I'd expected. Marta sat across from me, looking haggard and desperate, flanked by a public defender who was clearly out of his depth against Margaret Hoffman's steel-trap legal mind. "Your client is requesting 50% of marital assets and spousal support," Margaret said, her voice carrying the kind of professional authority that comes from never losing. Given the documented adultery and the fact that she contributed to her own unemployment through professional misconduct, we're prepared to offer 30% of non-retirement assets and no spousal support. Marta's lawyer shuffled his papers nervously. "That seems punitive given the 18-year marriage." Margaret smiled coldly. "What's punitive is conducting an affair using marital funds and destroying professional relationships that affected the family's financial stability. We have documentation showing $8,400 in hotel and restaurant charges over 4 months, all funded by joint accounts for personal entertainment." I watched Marta's face as the numbers sank in. She'd spent nearly $9,000 of our money on her affair, money that could have paid for Ross and Amelia's college expenses or family vacations she'd been too busy to take. "The children have expressed a strong preference to live with their father in Seattle," Margaret continued. "They're both honor students who feel their educational opportunities would be better served by the excellent schools in the Pacific Northwest. Mrs. Carter would have supervised visitation rights during school breaks." "This is vindictive," Marta finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alex, we built a life together. Doesn't that mean anything?" I looked at her across the conference table. This woman I'd loved for nearly 2 decades who'd thrown everything away for a man who disappeared the moment things got complicated. "It meant everything to me," I said calmly. "That's why I would have given you an amicable divorce if you'd asked for one. Instead, you chose to sneak around, lie to my face, and humiliate me publicly while spending our money on your affair. So, now you get to live with the choices you made." The settlement was signed within an hour. Marta got the house, which she immediately had to sell to pay legal fees and living expenses. I kept my retirement accounts, got primary custody of the kids, and started my new life in Seattle with a clean slate and a spectacular view. 6 months later, Ross and Amelia were thriving in their new schools, making friends and exploring colleges on the West Coast. Brandon was working at a small marketing firm in Phoenix for half his previous salary, still dodging calls from creditors and ex-wives. Marta had found a job at a small nonprofit in Chicago, making $35,000 a year, a fraction of what she'd earned before her affair destroyed her career. Sometimes I get anonymous messages from other people who'd been burned by Brandon over the years. Apparently, I wasn't his first victim, just his most strategic one. His ex-wife thanked me for the documentation that helped her collect back alimony. 2 former business partners used the information to file fraud charges that were still pending. But the most satisfying moment came during a company video call when one of my Seattle colleagues mentioned meeting someone from Chicago who knew me. "Funny thing," he said, "this guy Brandon Fisk claimed you two had history. Said he used to date your ex-wife. When I told him you were our regional finance director, he got really quiet and left the bar." I smiled, looking out at the Seattle skyline from my corner office. The view from the top was spectacular, but the view from the moral high ground was even better. Brandon and Marta had both assumed I was weak enough to accept whatever scraps of dignity they decided to leave me. They couldn't have been more wrong.